Welcome back to the channel everyone, and a huge thank you for tuning in today because you're about to hear one of the most unbelievable, fascinating, and downright jaw-dropping stories in the world of rare coins, a story that proves that sometimes the smallest, most ordinary objects hiding in plain sight can carry life-changing value, and today we are diving deep into the legendary 1944 wheat penny, a coin that most people would barely glance at, a coin that once bought almost nothing, yet in certain extraordinary cases has been linked to an almost mythical valuation of $31 million, and yes, you heard that right, $31 million for a single 1-cent coin, a story that continues to ignite imaginations, spark debates, and fuel treasure hunts across the globe. So settle in, relax, and prepare to see pocket change in a way you never have before, because by the time the story ends, you may never look at a penny the same way again. And the tale of the 1944 wheat penny begins during one of the most turbulent and defining periods in modern history, the heart of World War II, when the entire United States economy was retooled for war, factories shifted production overnight, raw materials were rationed, and even the coins in people's pockets became part of the war effort, because copper, the primary metal used in pennies, was desperately needed for ammunition, shell casings, and military wiring, leading the United States Mint in 1943 to produce pennies made of zinc-coated steel instead of the traditional copper alloy, a decision that solved one problem but created several others, including public confusion, rusting coins, and widespread dissatisfaction, and by 1944 the mint decided to return to copper-based pennies, but not just any copper. Instead they used recycled shell casings from military training grounds, giving the 1944 wheat penny a powerful symbolic connection to the war itself, turning each coin into a tiny relic of global conflict and sacrifice. And under normal circumstances, the 1944 wheat penny is a very common coin, with more than 1 billion struck across the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, making most examples worth only a few cents to a few dollars depending on condition. Yet hidden within this massive production are extraordinary mistakes, minting anomalies, and metal composition errors so rare that they have elevated a handful of these pennies into the realm of legends, and the most famous and valuable of all 1944 wheat penny errors is the 1944 steel cent, a coin that was never supposed to exist, because although 1943 pennies were struck on steel planchets, the mint officially reverted back to copper planchets in 1944, but somehow, a tiny number of leftover steel blanks from 1943 were still lingering in the minting presses or bins, and when the 1944 dies were installed, these steel planchets were accidentally struck with the new 1944 design, creating a coin that defies the official record, a coin that should not exist, and it is precisely this impossibility that drives its staggering value, because rarity alone is powerful, but rarity combined with historical error becomes irresistible to collectors, and only a handful of genuine 1944 steel pennies are known to exist today, with estimates often ranging from fewer than 30 examples across all mints, and even fewer confirmed from specific mint marks like Denver and San Francisco, and these coins are instantly recognizable to experts because they stick to a magnet, unlike genuine copper pennies. Yet even this test has fooled countless hopeful finders, because copper-plated steel fakes and altered coins flood the market, making authentication absolutely critical, and when a genuine 1944 steel wheat penny appears, it sends shockwaves through the numismatic world, because it represents a perfect storm of historical significance, accidental survival, and extreme scarcity, and while documented auction prices for confirmed specimens have reached into the millions, the rumored $31 million valuation comes from the theoretical ceiling placed on a flawless, perfectly preserved example with impeccable provenance, a coin that would not only be the finest known but also symbolize the pinnacle of American mint errors, a coin so iconic that elite collectors, museums, and private investors might engage in a bidding war unlike anything seen before. But the steel penny is only the beginning of the 1944 wheat penny's mystique, because another equally fascinating and valuable error involves the wrong metal in the opposite direction, copper planchets intended for 1944 that were struck in earlier years or with unusual alloy compositions, including transitional errors involving bronze, brass, or even experimental metal mixes. And then there are the double die errors, which occur when a die receives multiple misaligned impressions during its creation, resulting in visible doubling on letters, numbers, or Lincoln's profile. And while double dies are known across many dates, certain dramatic examples from 1944 exhibit bold, unmistakable doubling that significantly increases their value, especially when combined with high-grade preservation, and collectors obsess over the date, the word liberty, the motto "I in God we trust," and Lincoln's eye and bow tie for signs of doubling, because the more pronounced and original the doubling, the more desirable the coin becomes. And then there are repunched mint marks, a fascinating category of error from an era when mint marks were punched into dies by hand rather than integrated into the master hub, meaning a mint employee might punch a D or S into the die, realize it was misaligned, and punch it again, leaving overlapping impressions that today can be seen under magnification. And these repunched mint marks turn otherwise ordinary coins into sought-after collectibles, particularly when the repunching is bold and well-preserved, and the 1944D and 1944S wheat pennies offer several known varieties that collectors eagerly hunt for, yet the errors don't stop there, because off-center strikes, broad strikes, clipped planchets, and lamination errors also appear among 1944 pennies, each representing a moment when the minting process went awry, producing a coin that slipped past quality control and entered circulation. And while many of these errors command hundreds or thousands of dollars rather than millions, they contribute to the overall mystique of the 1944 wheat penny by demonstrating just how many ways a seemingly simple coin can become extraordinary. And then there are die cracks, die breaks, and cut errors, where the die itself begins to fail after striking thousands or millions of coins, leaving raised lines, blobs, or missing design elements on the coin's surface, and advanced collectors often specialize in these varieties, tracing the progression of die deterioration and mapping out stages of damage, turning coins into forensic evidence of the minting process itself. And when you combine one or more of these errors with exceptional condition, meaning sharp details, original luster, and minimal marks, the value can increase exponentially, because condition is king in numismatics, and a pristine error coin is infinitely more desirable than a worn one. Yet the $31 million narrative surrounding the 1944 wheat penny is not solely about technical errors, it is also fueled by possibility, mystery, and the enduring belief that undiscovered treasures still exist, because unlike ancient coins or medieval artifacts, wheat pennies are relatively modern, and millions of people have handled them, spent them, and stored them away in jars, boxes, and drawers, meaning the chance, however slim, that a genuine 1944 steel penny or other ultra-rare error remains hidden is what keeps collectors searching, metal detecting, and inspecting every coin they come across, and stories circulate constantly about someone finding a rare penny in change, at a flea market, or in a deceased relative's belongings. And while many of these stories turn out to be misunderstandings or hoaxes, a few have proven real, reinforcing the idea that lightning can strike twice, and that ordinary people can stumble upon extraordinary wealth. And this dream is a powerful force, because the idea that a 1-cent coin could be worth millions challenges our assumptions about value, history, and luck, and it invites us to slow down, to look closer, and to appreciate the hidden complexity of everyday objects. And for the 1944 wheat penny, the combination of wartime context, material transitions, manual minting techniques, and sheer scale of production created a perfect environment for mistakes, and those mistakes, preserved by chance, became legends. And the $31 million figure, while speculative, represents the ultimate expression of that legend, a hypothetical price tag that reflects not just metal and rarity, but storytelling, symbolism, and human fascination, because at the highest levels of collecting, coins are not just objects, they are narratives frozen in time. And a flawless 1944 steel penny would tell a story of war, industry, error, survival, and discovery all at once, making it priceless to the right buyer. And even beyond the steel penny, some collectors speculate about undiscovered experimental strikes, mule coins pairing mismatched dies, or undocumented planchet compositions that could surface one day and redefine what we think we know about the 1944 issue, because mint records, while extensive, are not infallible, and history is full of surprises, and this uncertainty keeps the market alive, dynamic, and endlessly intriguing. And it also underscores the importance of education and authentication, because with great value comes great deception, and the market is flooded with altered coins, copper-plated steel cents, and outright counterfeits designed to exploit hopeful finders, which is why professional grading services play such a crucial role in separating genuine treasures from clever fakes, and why any potential discovery must be approached with skepticism, patience, and expert evaluation. Yet despite the risks, the allure remains, because the payoff, even if only one in a million, is life-changing. And that allure is what has kept the 1944 wheat penny at the center of numismatic lore for decades, inspiring articles. Next. 1958, D wheat penny today. Because if you have ever casually glanced at the penny sitting in your pocket or tucked away in a jar and wondered whether any of them could secretly be worth a fortune, today's story is going to completely change the way you look at one particular coin, the 1958 D wheat penny, a seemingly ordinary cent that has become one of the most talked about and mysterious coins in American numismatic history, with rumors, legends, and collector speculation placing its potential value as high as $23 million, and in this deep dive we are going to explore exactly why this humble copper coin has captured so much attention, how a combination of rare errors, minting mistakes, historical timing, and collector psychology has elevated it into the realm of legendary treasure, and why some experts believe that under the right circumstances a single surviving example could command a price that rivals fine art and rare gemstones. So settle in, stay with me until the end, and if you love uncovering hidden value in everyday coins, make sure you're part of this journey, because stories like this are the reason collectors never stop searching. Now let's begin by setting the stage for the year 1958 itself, a pivotal moment in the history of the Lincoln wheat penny. Because 1958 was the final year that the United States Mint produced the classic wheat reverse design that had been in use since 1909, meaning every wheat penny dated 1958 represents the end of an era, and collectors have always been drawn to last year issues, but the Denver Mint's production that year adds an extra layer of intrigue, as the 1958 wheat penny was struck during a period of immense pressure on mint facilities, with high demand for coinage, aging equipment, and a workforce tasked with producing massive quantities quickly and efficiently. Conditions that are perfect for mistakes to slip through unnoticed, and while millions of 1958 wheat pennies were produced and most are worth only modest amounts in circulated condition, a tiny fraction of them exhibit extraordinary errors that transform them from common sense into objects of intense desire. One of the most famous and controversial errors associated with the 1958 wheat penny family is the so-called double die obverse, an error where elements of the design appear doubled due to misalignment during the die creation process, and while the most famous double die of the era is the 1958 Philadelphia issue with dramatic doubling visible on the motto and date, some collectors and researchers believe that extremely rare and subtle double die varieties exist for the Denver Mint as well, varieties so faint and so poorly documented that only a handful of potential examples have ever been reported, making them the kind of discovery that could rewrite price records overnight if conclusively verified. And when you combine that possibility with the end-of-series status of the coin, you begin to see how speculation can drive values into the stratosphere. But double dies are only the beginning of the error story, because the 1958 wheat penny is also associated with off-metal strikes, a type of mint error that occurs when a planchet intended for a different coin or a different composition is accidentally fed into the press, resulting in a penny struck on the wrong metal. And during the late 1950s the mint was experimenting with different alloys and dealing with leftover planchets from other denominations, creating the perfect environment for a copper cent to be struck on a bronze, brass, or even silver-colored planchet. And if a genuine 1958 wheat penny were discovered struck on an experimental or transitional planchet, especially one never officially released for circulation, its value could soar into the multi-million-dollar range due to its uniqueness and historical significance. Another category of error that fuels the $23 million valuation theory is the presence of dramatic die breaks, cuds, and retained cuds, where chunks of the die break away and leave raised, irregular blobs of metal on the coin. And while minor die cracks are common and generally add little value, massive die failures that dramatically alter the coin's appearance are exceptionally rare, especially on late-date wheat pennies that were produced with more modern quality controls, and a 1958 wheat penny showing a spectacular cut affecting key design elements like Lincoln's portrait or the wheat ears could be considered a one-of-a-kind artifact, particularly if it can be traced to a specific moment late in a die's life. And then there are repunched mint marks, a fascinating relic of an era when mint marks were punched into dies by hand, and although by 1958 the practice was becoming more standardized, the Denver Mint still produced coins with repunched mint marks, some of which show dramatic doubling or even multiple impressions, and advanced collectors pay substantial premiums for these varieties. But in an extreme case where the mint mark is wildly misaligned, inverted, or punched over another mark, the coin could achieve legendary status, especially if it represents an undocumented or unique configuration. And beyond these well-known categories lies the realm of errors that verge on the unbelievable, such as brockage strikes where a coin is struck against another coin instead of a die, creating a mirror image impression, or multiple strike errors where a penny is struck 2 or 3 times with varying rotations and offsets, producing a chaotic and visually stunning result. And a 1958 wheat penny exhibiting such an error in pristine condition would not just be a coin, but a conversation piece, a museum-worthy object that blurs the line between currency and art. And it is precisely this kind of visual drama that can attract bidders far outside the traditional coin collecting community, including investors, art collectors, and institutions willing to pay extraordinary sums for something truly unique. And of course no discussion of extreme coin values would be complete without addressing condition, because even the rarest error can be dramatically diminished by wear, damage, or improper handling. And when we talk about a potential $23 million 1958 wheat penny, we are talking about a coin that would likely need to be in near-perfect or mint-state condition, with full original luster, sharp details, and no evidence of cleaning or corrosion, a coin that looks as though it just left the press yesterday. And while such preservation might seem impossible for a coin more than 6 decades old, history has shown that extraordinary pieces do survive, sometimes tucked away in mint bags, forgotten collections, or estate holdings that remained untouched for generations. And the idea that such a coin could still be out there is what keeps collectors searching through rolls, jars, and inherited boxes with unwavering hope. But the story does not end with physical characteristics alone, because the psychology of collecting plays a massive role in how values are perceived and realized, and the Wheat Penny series in particular holds a special place in American culture, evoking nostalgia, history, and the romance of a bygone era. And the 1958 Wheat Penny, as the final Denver Mint issue of the series, carries symbolic weight that transcends its face value, making it a perfect candidate for myth making and headline-grabbing valuations. And when rumors circulate of a coin being worth millions, those rumors can take on a life of their own, attracting media attention, online speculation, and a feedback loop of excitement that further elevates perceived value, especially if the coin in question has never been publicly sold and therefore lacks a definitive price ceiling. And in some cases, the mere possibility of a record-breaking sale is enough to keep values climbing, because collectors are not just buying metal, they are buying a story, a piece of history, and the chance to own something that no one else has. And this brings us to the role of authentication and certification, because for any 1958 Wheat Penny to command a price anywhere near $23 million, it would need to be authenticated by top-tier grading services, thoroughly studied by experts, and accepted by the numismatic community as genuine and significant, a process that can take years and involves intense scrutiny, debate, and sometimes controversy. But history has shown that once a coin clears these hurdles and is recognized as a legitimate rarity, its value can skyrocket almost overnight, as collectors and investors rush to secure what may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And while skeptics rightly point out that many claims of multi-million-dollar pennies are exaggerated or based on misunderstandings, it is also true that some of the most valuable coins in the world were once dismissed as impossible or mythical until a real example surfaced. And the 1958 Wheat Penny sits at the crossroads of these two realities, a coin that is common enough to inspire hope yet rare enough in its most extreme error forms to justify extraordinary speculation. And as long as even a sliver of possibility remains that a unique, spectacular, and pristine example exists or could be discovered, the legend of the $23 million 1958 Wheat Penny will continue to captivate collectors and dreamers alike, serving as a powerful reminder that hidden treasures can still exist in the most unexpected places. So the next time you come across an old penny. Next. 1951 Wheat Penny. Today we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating and mysterious coins in American numismatic history, the 1951 Wheat Penny, a humble copper cent that on the surface looks ordinary but has been whispered about for decades as a coin that can command a jaw-dropping value of up to $13 million due to a combination of minting errors, production mistakes, historical circumstances, extreme rarity, collector obsession, and the powerful psychology of scarcity. And as we begin this journey together, imagine holding a small brown coin in your hand, slightly worn, maybe tucked away in an old jar or inherited collection, never realizing that its story stretches back to a time of post-war America, a nation transitioning from conflict to prosperity, where the San Francisco Mint was under pressure to meet demand, machinery was aging, quality control was imperfect, and subtle errors slipped through that would later ignite legends in the coin collecting world. Because the 1951 Wheat Penny sits at a crossroads of history and human imperfection, struck in a year when the Lincoln Wheat Cent series was nearing its end, making any unusual example from this period especially important. And while millions of normal 1951 pennies were produced, the real magic lies in the rare and elusive error specimens that were never supposed to exist. Coins born from accidents that the mint never intended collectors to see, yet they survived, circulated briefly, or were set aside by sharp-eyed individuals, creating the foundation for today's staggering valuations. And to truly understand how a 1951 Wheat Penny could possibly reach a value of $13 million, we must explore every layer of what makes a coin valuable, beginning with mint mark significance, because the small s beneath the date tells us this coin was struck in San Francisco, a mint known during that era for inconsistent striking pressure, worn dies, and occasional lapses in inspection, especially when production quotas were high, leading to weak strikes, die cracks, die breaks, and off-metal errors that slipped into circulation. And one of the most important value drivers in this story is the possibility of a wrong planchet error, where a 1951 Wheat Penny may have been struck on a planchet intended for another denomination or composition, such as a leftover steel planchet from World War II-era experiments or a foreign blank accidentally mixed into the supply. And while steel cents officially ended in 1943, the mint's internal processes were not always perfectly sealed, meaning stray blanks could remain in machinery for years, and if a 1951 penny were confirmed to be struck on a steel or silver-colored planchet, authenticated by metallurgical analysis, it would instantly become one of the most important error coins ever discovered, driving values into the millions due to its impossible nature and historical contradiction, and collectors crave impossibilities. Because they rewrite what we think we know about minting history, and beyond wrong planchets there is the equally fascinating realm of doubled die errors, where a misalignment during the die creation process causes design elements to appear doubled, sometimes dramatically, sometimes subtly, and in the case of a 1951 wheat penny, a strong double die obverse affecting the date, the word liberty, or the motto "In God We Trust" would be considered monumental, because San Francisco doubled dies from this era are exceptionally scarce, and if a specimen were discovered with bold, clearly separated doubling visible without magnification, it would ignite bidding wars among elite collectors, museums, and private investors who specialize in once-in-a-lifetime coins, pushing the value upward toward seven figures and beyond, especially if the coin is preserved in high mint state condition, because condition multiplies rarity, and a rare error in poor condition is valuable, but a rare error in pristine condition is legendary. And speaking of condition, the concept of full original luster on a 1951 wheat penny is another key element, because many San Francisco cents were weakly struck with dull surfaces, so an example with blazing red color, sharp wheat lines, and crisp Lincoln details would already be desirable, but if that visual perfection is paired with a dramatic error, the result is a coin that exists outside normal price guides and enters the realm of trophy collectibles, where value is determined by desire rather than charts, and another error that fuels the $13 million narrative is the possibility of a mule error, an extremely rare situation where mismatched dies are paired together, such as a wheat cent obverse combined with a reverse not intended for that coin, and while confirmed mules from the early 1950s are extraordinarily rare, their existence is not impossible, especially during periods of die reuse or experimental setups, and a 1951 wheat penny mule would instantly become one of the most studied and valuable U.S. coins ever known, because it would represent a catastrophic breakdown in minting protocol, and collectors live for those moments when the system fails in spectacular fashion, and then there are die cracks and cuds, where sections of the die break away, leaving raised blobs or missing details on the coin, and while minor cracks are common, massive retained cuds or shattered dies that dramatically alter Lincoln's portrait. Or the wheat ears can elevate a coin from curiosity to masterpiece, especially if the damage is visually striking and clearly mint-caused rather than post-mint damage, and some collectors specialize exclusively in dramatic die failures, paying enormous sums for the most visually impressive examples, and when such an error appears on a late-date wheat cent like 1951's, it gains additional importance because it represents the final years of a beloved design that ended in 1958, making any anomaly from this era emotionally charged for collectors who grew up searching wheat pennies from pocket change, and beyond physical errors, the mythology surrounding the 1951 wheat penny also plays a role in its perceived value, because stories circulate within the collecting community about undiscovered hoards, secret collections, and coins locked away in bank vaults for decades, fueling speculation that only one or two ultra-rare error examples exist, and when supply is believed to be nearly non-existent, demand becomes irrational, driving values to extremes that outsiders find hard to believe but insiders understand completely, because high-end numismatics is not just about metal, it is about ownership of history, bragging rights, and the emotional satisfaction of possessing something no one else can have, and the $13 million figure represents the upper edge of what such a coin could achieve in a private sale between billionaires or institutions, where the price is justified not by melt value or catalog listings but by uniqueness and prestige, and authentication is another crucial chapter in this story, because for a 1951 wheat penny to reach such heights, it must be verified by top grading services using advanced technology, including weight analysis, XRF metal testing, die matching, and microscopic inspection, and once certified, encapsulated, and documented, the coin becomes part of the official numismatic record, transforming from rumor to reality, and history shows us that when a coin crosses that threshold, its value can explode overnight, as collectors rush to be associated with the discovery, and auction houses build narratives around it, turning the coin into a celebrity, and this phenomenon has happened before with coins like the 1943 copper cent and the 1955 double die penny, both of which were once dismissed as myths before becoming multi-million-dollar icons, and the 1951 wheat penny fits perfectly into this lineage of impossible survivors, and another factor that contributes to its potential value is the psychology of near-miss rarity, because while 1951 pennies are not the lowest mintage wheat cents, they occupy a sweet spot where collectors often overlook them, increasing the chances that rare errors remained undiscovered for decades, and when such a coin finally emerges, it feels like a revelation, reinforcing the belief that treasures are still out there waiting to be found, and this belief keeps the market alive and competitive. And let's not forget the role of provenance, because a coin with a documented history, such as being discovered in an old estate, inherited from a mint worker, or traced back to a specific region, can add layers of intrigue that enhance value. And if a 1951 sweet penny were linked to a compelling backstory, its price could climb even higher, because collectors are storytellers at heart, and they pay for narratives as much as for metal. And as we explore all these possibilities together, it becomes clear that the $13 million valuation is not based on a single factor but on a perfect storm of errors, mistakes, rarity, condition, historical timing, collector psychology, and the enduring appeal of the Lincoln Wheat Cent series. And whether such a coin is currently sitting in a private collection, locked in a vault, or still waiting to be discovered in a forgotten box of pennies, the mere possibility is enough to inspire millions of people to check their change, examine their collections last today, because in this video we are diving into one of the most fascinating and talked about coins in American numismatic history, a coin that at first glance looks like nothing more than an ordinary old penny but has been whispered about in collector circles as being worth up to $8 million. Yes, you heard that right, $8 million, and that coin is the 1952 Lincoln Wheat Penny. So get comfortable, stay with me, and let's explore together how a single cent struck more than 70 years ago could possibly reach a value that rivals luxury mansions and rare works of art. Because the story of this coin is not just about copper and wheat stalks, it is about history, human error, minting mistakes, rarity, survival, collector demand, and the endless possibilities that turn a forgotten pocket change coin into a legendary treasure. And to truly understand why the 1952 Wheat Penny has been rumored and discussed as an $8 million coin, we need to go back to the early 1950s, when America was still finding its footing after World War II. The Korean War was underway, industry was booming, the United States Mint was under pressure to produce massive quantities of coinage for a growing economy, and the Denver Mint in particular was striking millions upon millions of Lincoln cents to keep up with demand. These cents carried the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, designed by Victor David Brenner, and the iconic wheat ears on the reverse that had been used since 1909. And by 1952 the wheat penny was a familiar sight in every American's pocket. Yet behind the scenes the minting process was far from perfect, because coins were struck using massive presses, steel dies that wore down quickly, planchets that could be improperly prepared, and quality control standards that, while strict for their time, were nowhere near as refined as modern standards. And it is within this environment of speed, pressure, and mechanical limitations that some of the most valuable mint errors and varieties in U.S. history were born, including the types of errors that collectors believe could exist on a 1952 wheat penny that would justify an astronomical valuation, starting with one of the most significant possibilities, the presence of a major double die. Double die errors occur when a coin die receives a misaligned or multiple impressions from the hub, resulting in double design elements on the struck coin. And while most people associate famous double dies with years like 1955 or 1969, the possibility of a dramatic double die on a 1952 penny cannot be dismissed, especially considering that Denver Mint double dies are often underreported compared to Philadelphia issues, and a bold, dramatic double die showing strong doubling on Lincoln's date, motto, or portrait, if discovered in pristine condition, could instantly place the coin among the most important Lincoln cent varieties ever found. And when rarity, condition, and demand collide at that level, values can escalate into the millions, particularly if the coin is unique or one of only a handful known. But doubling is only one piece of the puzzle, because another major factor that could push a 1952 wheat penny into $8 million territory is the possibility of an off-metal or wrong planchet error. During the early 1950s the mint was producing not only cents but nickels, dimes, quarters, and foreign coins, and planchets intended for other denominations or even other countries could accidentally find their way into cent presses. Imagine a 1952 wheat penny struck on a silver dime planchet, a brass planchet, or even an experimental alloy. Such a coin would be an extraordinary error, especially if it were confirmed and authenticated, and history has shown that off-metal Lincoln cents can command staggering prices, particularly when they come from years where such errors are unknown or exceedingly rare. And if a 1952 cent were struck on a planchet that was never supposed to be used for cents, the uniqueness alone could justify a valuation in the multi-million-dollar range, especially if it represented a one-of-a-kind survivor from a minting mishap that was never supposed to leave the facility. And then there is the tantalizing possibility of a transitional metal error, which collectors find endlessly fascinating, because transitional errors occur when the mint changes metal compositions and leftover planchets from one composition are accidentally struck with the next year's design, while the most famous example is the 1943 bronze cent or the 1944 steel cent. Collectors have long speculated about other transitional or experimental compositions in later years, and if a 1952 wheat penny were struck on a composition not officially documented, perhaps a leftover wartime alloy or an experimental copper blend, that coin would rewrite what we know about mint practices during that era, and coins that rewrite history are the ones that break price records, because they are not just collectibles, they are discoveries, and discoveries attract museums, elite collectors, and investors who are willing to pay enormous sums to own a piece of numismatic history that no one else can claim. But metal composition is not the only variable that matters, because striking errors themselves can turn an ordinary penny into a legendary rarity. For example, a dramatic off-center strike where a large portion of the design is missing yet key identifying features like the date and mint mark remain visible, or a multiple struck coin where the planchet was struck 2 or 3 times with significant rotation or misalignment. These types of errors are visually stunning and highly collectible, and while many off-center or multi-struck coins exist, truly dramatic examples from specific dates and mints in high grades can achieve extraordinary prices. And if a 1952 penny exhibited a spectacular mint error, combined with extreme rarity, such as being the only known example of its kind, collectors could easily justify a valuation in the millions, especially if the coin were preserved in near-perfect condition, because condition is another crucial piece of this puzzle. A coin's grade can be the difference between a few $100s and several $1 million, and when we talk about an $8 million penny, we are not talking about a heavily worn coin pulled from circulation. We are talking about a coin that has survived the decades in exceptional condition, possibly in mint state or even gem mint state, with full original luster, sharp details, and minimal contact marks. And coins like that often come from mint sets, hoards, or collections that were carefully stored away and forgotten, only to be rediscovered generations later. And the idea that a rare 1952 error penny could have been saved unknowingly by someone who recognized it looked unusual, or by a collector who simply set aside rolls of pennies in the 1950s, is not far-fetched at all, because many of today's greatest numismatic discoveries were found exactly that way. But beyond the technical errors and condition, there is also the powerful force of collector psychology and market dynamics, because the value of a coin is not determined solely by its metal or its age, it is determined by what collectors are willing to pay, and Lincoln cents are one of the most widely collected series in the world, with millions of collectors across multiple generations, and within that massive collector base there is intense competition for the finest, rarest, and most unusual examples. And when a coin emerges that checks all the boxes, rarity, condition, historical significance, visual appeal, and mystery, bidding wars can erupt, and bidding wars are how prices reach levels that seem unbelievable to the average person. And when you add the mystique of a coin rumored to be worth $8 million, that story alone fuels demand, because collectors are not just buying a coin, they are buying into a legend, and legends carry a premium, especially when they are backed by solid numismatic evidence. And speaking of legends, part of what drives the fascination with the 1952 wheat penny is the fact that it sits in a year that is often overlooked. It is not as famous as 1955, it does not have an instantly recognizable era that everyone knows about, and that sense of the unknown is exactly what excites collectors, because it suggests that something extraordinary could still be out there waiting to be found. And history has repeatedly shown us that overlooked years sometimes produce the biggest surprises. And if a previously unknown major era variety from 1952 were to be discovered today, certified by a major grading service, and confirmed as unique or extremely rare, the numismatic world would take notice immediately, prices would skyrocket, and headlines would spread far beyond coin collecting circles, drawing in mainstream media attention, investors, and even people who have never thought about coins before, all of whom would suddenly want a piece of that story. But let's also talk about die errors and die states, because worn or damaged dies can produce fascinating results, such as die cracks, cuds, retained cuds, or even dramatic die breaks that leave raised blobs of metal on the coin's surface. While many minor die cracks are common and add little value, major die breaks that significantly alter the design are much rarer and more desirable. And if a 1952 penny were struck with an extreme die break that created a unique and dramatic appearance, especially if it occurred early in the die's life and resulted in multiple high-quality strikes, that could form a small but highly valuable variety. And again, rarity plus visual impact equals high value. But perhaps one of the most intriguing possibilities is the idea of a mule error. A mule occurs when two dies not intended to be paired together are used to strike a coin, such as an obverse from one year paired with a reverse from another, or a cent obverse paired with a die from a different denomination. Mule errors are incredibly rare and often escape detection because they were never supposed to exist, and if a 1952 Dewey penny mule were discovered, especially one involving an unexpected reverse design or mismatched year, it would be one of the most important error coins ever found, and coins of that magnitude do not sell for thousands or even hundreds of thousands, they sell for millions, because they are irreplaceable. But beyond specific errors, there is also the broader context of survival rates, because while millions of 1952 D pennies were minted, the number that survive today in top condition is much smaller.